This review.
Tezer Özlü hakikaten az sayıda yazdığı eserle Türk edebiyatını sarsmış kaybettiğimiz yazarımız Tezer Özlü olacak.
Tezer Özlü. Özlü. I'm going to say Özlü. I just wanted to make sure I got her name right. This is going to be. Why am I so hype? This is going to be a longer review. I have a lot of long book reviews coming up. I mean, long. Long. Because I've been reading at a greater pace. I said this in my previous video from last week. I've been able to read. I've read more in the month between in the mid August through September, in at a rate that I haven't been able to read at since 2023. And so I, for once in my life, finally, I have. It's been a while since I've had a stack of books to review, and I've been reading some pretty hefty stuff. Books that are going to require very meaty reviews. Not that I don't have meaty reviews anyway, but I mean really meaty. I have Books of Jakob getting posted next week after this video, and that is going to be it's going to be a minimum of 30 minutes. It took me 2 hours. It took me an hour and a half just to outline the review and another 2 hours to write it. And just to draft it, mind you. So, just because I wanted to do it justice. One of my crazy eyes. I wanted to do it justice. This review is another one of those. This book is another one of those reviews, and I'm really excited to be talking about Cold Nights of Childhood by Tezer Özlü. This is a Turkish author, and this was published in 2023 by Transit Books. This is the first time this Turkish author has been translated in English. I saw one English-speaking reviewer that posted something 2 weeks ago for her other novel that was just published in English. I want to say either earlier this year or late last year. And so I'm really excited to be talking about this author because I think that more people should be reading her now that she's now available in English. And this is a slim volume, as you can tell, very slim. You take out the afterword and you take out the forward. The story itself is less than 100 pages long, but this is an extremely highly annotated book for me, and the themes were crazy. I'm going to go ahead and say it. If you are a fan of stories like The Bell Jar, if you're a fan of Virginia Woolf, if you are a fan of those types of narratives, you are in good company with this author. She lived a very short life. She was born in 1943 or 42, and she passed away in the 80s. She passed away at 42, 43 years old, which is unfortunate, but I mean, she wrote a banger, so let's talk about it. Nothing's changed. Oh, to part with the clouds, seize the sun, and run with these children across the hills and forests, through wind, rain, to a place where we can breathe. Cold Nights of Childhood is a novella, and I just happened to pun it last year. How did I happen to pun this book? It just popped up it popped up on Amazon. And what I'll do, I actually try not to order books on Amazon too much, but sometimes what I like to do with Amazon is I will scroll through books because they do have like an insane inventory. And based on what you're looking at, of course, their algorithm will feed you what you are probably going to like, and that's how that popped up. And what I'll do with Amazon is I have a list on Amazon of just books that I have saved, and then if I'm out in the wild, when I'm out in the wild at a bookstore, I use that to check books off my list. I try to use Amazon for books as little as possible, not for any really moral reason. I know some people have moral reasons why they don't want to use Amazon, but for me, it's a good tool to make lists. And it fed me this book. It also fed me Gifted, that I reviewed earlier this year, by Suzumi Suzuki, by Transit Books, this publisher, which I think I'm probably becoming a fan of. It's feeding me some more obscure, less talked about novels. It was newly released again in English in 2023, though it was originally published in Turkish in 1980. And I remember, again, I saved it in a list on Amazon, and then I finally got my hands on it. And it stayed in the back of my mind after I read the synopsis almost a year ago now, as of the recording of this video. And I just kept thinking about it. And I was like, you know what? Let me go and read it. It's a short book. And one thing I like to do these days is, you guys know I love a thick novel, but when I'm reading a thick novel, I like to have it paired with something very, very slim. It's just a nice balance. And it gives you a bit of a break. But also, after I finish a thick book, before I go into the next chunker, I like to sandwich them with these little slim volumes that still pack a punch. The nameless narrator is a young woman that feels constrained by her environment. She's transient between Istanbul, Paris, and Berlin. She's also in and out of psychiatric wards. Again, think the bell jar. She is seeking warmth, understanding, and freedom. The narrator comes from a traditional Turkish family, and she's quite critical of the systems that she's been taught to believe are correct. So she grew up in a Muslim household. She's very critical of that. She grew up with certain familial traditions, and she is, in the school system, you're taught certain things, and you're told to believe what is important or not. And you do that through, as she says, there are these systems in which memorizing what one is told to memorize, and then you have to repeat that information over and over again. It's a form of brainwashing from the perspective of this narrator. So in order for her to break away from these systems, she must unlearn what she's been taught, whether that again be the religious, the ideological, the educational, or the family traditional structures that she was raised under. This narrator sees these systems. So this narrator also sees how these systems have created patterns that only reinforce generational cycles, and some of those cycles are not good cycles. I wonder about God, if he exists or not. For as long as I believe that God exists, I pray and pray. Pray for us all. Now there is no need. I can think what I like. In the lack of other teachers, other ways of learning that might give our thoughts direction, might help us make sense of the lives awaiting us, what we need most to understand what life is, to come to terms with it. Memorize poems, memorize words, memorize formula. How I long to forget everything I've ever learned. Mothers and fathers who do not love each other and never make love. The nuns who are wedded to God. Our family and our nation. Our love for them running through our veins. The nation, the nation, the nation, the drum roll of our hearts. I shall forget everything I've learned. No going down that dead end. I think so. In this story, she also ended up going to a Catholic school, with nuns, which is interesting. So it is clear from those quotes that the narrator is seeking to escape this confinement that she feels that she's grown up under or in. So whether that be through travel or as she gets a little bit older, spending time in cafes, which in this time and place, in this setting, is a questionable activity. So you get this idea, or you get this environment when she does kind of put the narrator in these settings of these smoke-filled cafes where the emphasis is more on intellectual thought. It kind of reminded me a bit of At the Existentialist Cafe, which is a non-fiction work. It's up here somewhere on a top shelf if you can't see. This image of people sitting in cafes and exchanging thought and reading books and smoking, which would be maybe not the environment that her parents would think is appropriate for her, especially as a woman. She also seeks this type of freedom through sexual liaisons, through sexual encounters. How different that world is from our dark boulevards and garbage-strewn streets. To us, it's a dream world. Russia is closer, and in its literature, we find a world we recognize, a world full of pain and poverty. How certain I am that the world beyond has nothing in common with the one we know here, or the future for which we're being prepared. And in those days, there was no way to take thoughts such as these forward. There is a type of entrapment that a person can feel when their environment does not allow for them to express their thoughts freely. Not being understood. You express a thought, or you can play devil's advocate perhaps, or you try to see things from multiple lenses, or you simply state what you believe with a lot of conviction, and that's not received, or you're suppressed because of it. That is its own type of entrapment. It's a mental entrapment when you're not understood or you're not given the environment to speak freely because what you're saying is considered hurtful or derogatory, depending on who's listening, right? What does that mean? So Cold Nights of Childhood is a melancholy story. And the most alarming and the saddest bits of this section are the sections in which the narrator describes the sheer horror of being institutionalized in a mental hospital, which up until a time we called asylums. These state-run asylums that don't, especially in the West, I can't vouch for other places, but I know especially in the West, by the early 2000s, they had all shut down. They had made their appearance in the 19th century. Really, actually, no, that's not true. The oldest asylums are older than that. There were some really, really old asylums in England, I know, that I came across. Was it Bedlam? I think it was Bedlam. It's maybe 1600, something like that. But so again, this is during a time where these types of state-run institutions were very commonplace. And it wasn't unusual for people to end up in them. So Özlü herself was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And I didn't find that out until after I read the novel because I wanted to I don't read forwards a lot because forwards I think can oftentimes give too much away about a story. But as I was reading these sections, I wondered if the narrator was pulling from her own experiences, because you can tell when an author is writing about something that they are familiar with or intimately familiar with, because there is a type of honesty about it that you can't fabricate. And even though Özlü never diagnoses or puts the narrator's diagnosis on the page, from how I was reading, I was like, is she describing bipolar disorder? And lo and behold, Özlü herself was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So you can see the author leaving breadcrumbs and dropping hints. The narrator does acknowledge that she is mentally suffering from something. But the emphasis is really less, I think, on the diagnosis, which is why I think that the author left it out. It's less on the diagnosis and the fact that she does have something in which she would consider herself having a mental issue, a mental disorder. But it's more on how these institutions only worsened her health due to the horrible treatments. There were treatments that weren't really treatments, and they actually make you worse, and these horrible, inhumane conditions. Though it is obvious that she is mentally suffering. The illness that began with such joy has carried me from Ankara to Istanbul to drop me off into this joyless room inside a mental hospital in the middle of the city. This room, which I entered at the age of 23, will rob me of all joy and tenderness for the next 5 years. For 5 years, the freedom to pursue my thoughts without fear or impediment will be beyond my reach. Because mental illness can be contagious, and not just contagious in the way that microbes are. A person's hopelessness comes right through the skin, and then your only hope is to be strong enough to save yourself. They're all looking for my light-hearted, free-thinking former self, but they can't find her. In their world, the highs and lows are never so extreme. In their world, joy never tips over into madness. In their world, depression doesn't tip into the desire of death. The narrator stays in these hospitals, re-emphasizes these systems of control that she, going back to the beginning of this review, how she feels confined. These institutions are another way to make an individual submit to control and to manipulation, and they are to manipulate the individual into obedience. If I don't take my clothes off, she'll complain about me to the doctors tomorrow. She'll say I'm very ill and that I need more shock treatment. She won't let me go into the garden, won't give me tea. I take off my nightgown. He blows into the room like a storm, and it's then, at that precise moment, that I go mad. The moment I begin to act just a bit like myself, I'm carted off to be locked once again behind bars. What do they want from me? I'm not angry. They only want what's best for me. Can this be natural? Is it even possible to go through this and still be thinking? But maybe it is natural. All I wanted was to be free to think and to act beyond the tedious limits set beyond the petite bourgeoisie. I don't really think I need to elaborate. These are quotes that speak for themselves. This narrator is constantly seeking warmth. And again, this is called the cold nights of childhood. She's constantly seeking warmth because it is the exact opposite of the cold nights that she experienced growing up, both literally and metaphorically speaking. Therefore, this narrator does seek warmth through sex, though it's not always in the most savory of ways. She's also seeking a warmth. Let's go back to one of the earlier quotes, how she says about parents' marriage. Mothers and fathers who do not love each other and never make love. She is also, through sex, she is seeking a warmth that she didn't witness in her parents' marriage. And there is a lot to be said for the impression that a loveless, non-affectionate marriage witnessed by a child. These things in our childhoods linger, subconsciously or consciously. And when we come of age and we're able to reflect back and say, oh, that's why I'm seeking this. That's why I desire X, Y, and Z, because I didn't have an example of it growing up. There is a source for where these things stem from. These cold nights of childhood, her desire to have a warm body in the bed. It's this desire to obtain the things that we were not provided in our youth, whether that be a certain type of physical affection, literal warmth. The warmth that a child observes between adults often in a marriage often provides an example for them growing up, or what to seek or what not to seek. Perhaps if you didn't witness it, you're like, I know what I want, and it's the opposite of that, so let me pursue that. I think that Özlü here is really making a statement here about how growing up, when we become adults and we have our own agency, we do have a responsibility and we have the agency to get away, again, from those generational cycles that left us with less than the best. We have a responsibility to correct it so that moving forward, it's no longer a cycle. I can sum that up easily, and I could have said, we have the autonomy to be the generational curse breakers in our bloodlines. I don't make much distinction between men and women. The important thing is to melt into the warmth of the person beside you, to blend into one. Do I need a love like that in my life? No, all I need is a man. I felt the need for a man since the age of 3 or 4, and now I can't even sleep unless a man is lying next to me. That's an interesting quote before I go into the last one, because if you're 3 or 4 and that's the desire that you have, something is off here. Children don't usually think like that, or unless they've been exposed to something. And I'm going to leave that there. The warmth embracing us, the cold night descending, and the stars those nights bring to the skies. This world that 2 people joined in perfect union can set a tremble. There is a progression in the story when it comes to this youth, this warmth, that she's seeking. And she is seeking, even throughout these sexual liaisons that she has, she is seeking that one life partner. And in the end, this quote, the last quote that I said, is actually taken from the very end of the book. You see this progression of it coming to pass. I hope that's not too much of a spoiler. The way that she talks about this particular union is different from the ones that she talks about in the previous iteration, previous examples in the book that were warmth for warmth's sake versus warmth and connection. There's a difference there because she's talking about a perfect union with this one man. So it does, even though overall it is a melancholy story, it ends on a lighter note. Cold Nights of Childhood is a novel that is reminiscent of narratives like The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, which I have read, or Faces in the Water by Janet Frame, which I have a review for on this channel. And yet, Özlü still has her own unique voice in her writing style. Her writing will just, it grabbed my attention immediately. It sucks you right in. And I found myself annotating almost every single page. Again, every word is deliberate. There's so much metaphor in this little novella. Again, this is under 100 pages. The story itself, there's a lot of forward and afterward commentary that they added into this book. As a reader, I didn't always agree with the main character, but I didn't need to. That wasn't the point. This was one of those stories. The point wasn't to agree or disagree. And again, I didn't always agree with her, but it was to observe and process, almost like this narrator's rationale and her progression from point A to point B. There is something visceral about this story. There are times within the narrative, within the writing, that Özlü is subtle. And yet there are still some sentences that are unflinchingly blunt, especially when she talks about some of her sexual encounters. It's not romanticized. Some of these encounters are not romanticized. It's almost clinical, but to the bluntness of like, she wrote that? I could see this, depending on when this is originally published or, during her generation, maybe this was a bit shocking. Maybe not so shocking to us now, but she's still very unflinchingly blunt. I really enjoyed this. It was one of those stories that when I picked it up, I didn't want to put it down. And even though it's a short read, it's quite dense actually. And it's heavy at times. And one of my most memorable reads of the year. I rated it a 4.5 out of 5. It's been recently translated into English. So it's just 2 years old in the English at this point. And I plan to read Journey to the Edge of Life, which is another novel of hers that was recently translated by this publisher. I'm going to have to look to see how much this woman actually wrote, because I'm hoping that what Transit Books is going to do is translate everything that she has into English. I hope so, because I'm going to get my hands on it, because this was just chef's kiss. Chef's kiss. This is a novel that is also going to be mentioned in a video at the end of this month talking about the asylum novel, because this fits that category. Way under the radar. Go read it. It's that good. Have you heard of this author? Have you heard of this little novella? Have you heard of this novella? Please feel free to leave me a comment below. Or are you now interested in reading it if this is the first time this has come across your radar? Also, feel free to follow me on Instagram, where I get up to more book shenanigans. All of my book content actually goes live there first. I post every Sunday a new review or a new post, bookish related, in my feed on every Sunday. That's all. I will see you in the next one.